Hi, Mark.
How are you
doing?
Okay, so welcome to
Teri Talks Talent.
Teri Talks Talent. That's the one. You got it. And today,
it's going to be one of those days, isn't it?
One of those days. Another one of those days. Today's episode number 6, is entitled "Who Needs Accents?" And so we figured that as accents is kind of my thing, Teri, you're going to be asking me a whole bunch of questions, and hopefully, if some other people join us, they can log in through their YouTube account, and then they can, as per usual, they can ask questions in the comments as well.
Exactly.
Okay. Excellent. All right. And welcome to everybody who has joined us to watch this spectacular event.
Well, I just have to preface this whole thing with, though the question is who needs accents, and it's like if you're an actor, everyone of you needs accents because they come up so regularly in while I'm submitting all of my actors to various projects. Like, it comes up every day on almost every project. There is some kind of role that wants an accent. So if you're an actor, you need accents. You do. So there we go. So that's
right.
Right away. I just want to be like perfectly upfront.
Right up front, exactly. Right up front, because that is the answer to the question. Actually, I mean, I do have a different answer for that question. Like one of the questions which I'll hear quite a bit is, do actors need accents? My answer to that is no. Actors don't need accents in the same way that actors don't need training, don't need talent, don't need any tuition.
What are you telling me?
They don't need any of this unless they want to be really successful.
Yeah. Okay, right? There you go. I'm glad you added that in, because I'm saying you need all of those things.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, to be fair, not all actors do accents. I mean, we can think of some of the really famous ones, like Sean Connery. The only accent he ever had was the Sean Connery accent. That was the only one. It was his own distinct.
Yeah, but then it was Sean Connery.
Exactly. So unless you're Sean Connery, which you aren't, and if you are, then you're dead. Then you're gonna need some help with it, right? So anyway, that's my alternative answer to that, which is really kind of pretty much the same. But yeah, different people have different priorities. But if you want to be really good and you want to be really adaptable to,
if you want to expand your range as an actor, which most actors do. I mean, sure, there are some that are satisfied being typecast in specific type of roles, and they figure as long as they're working, it doesn't matter whether they have range or not. They're working, and that's fine. Most of my actors want to be really successful at this, and they want to expand their range so they can do bigger and better projects, more roles, more role types. And so having accents under your belt really assists with that quite a bit. Great. So now I'm going to start asking you some questions.
Okay. All right.
Here we go. It's actually weird for me to be on the other side of the desk here. So just bear with me while I get my little questions ready. Yeah. So one of the questions that we had was, what's the difference between an accent and a dialect?
Okay, I love this one. So a lot of people are very confused by this because there are several answers, but I always go with the linguistics version of things. For me, it's very clear cut. So from a linguistic point of view, the difference between an accent and a dialect is that dialect is actually the words that are used to say something in a language. So it's your vocabulary and it's the grammar that puts those together. Okay.
Okay.
I'll give an example in a second, but so basically you can see a dialect on the page, whereas you can always see an accent on the page. Some people try a clumsy way of doing that, and there are effective ways of representing an accent on the page using International Phonetic Alphabet. But generally, yeah, it's the words you use and the grammar as well. Whereas an accent is actually how you pronounce those words and also your intonation and your basically the sound of those words that are coming out of your mouth. So if I give you an example of an accent, right? So let's see it's an accent from around the Newcastle area, and the way I'm talking now is a kind of what you might call a Geordie accent. And you can understand what I'm talking about, right? You can understand the words I'm saying because this is a Newcastle accent, but
Right.
it's not Newcastle dialect because I'm actually speaking in standard English, but I'm using a
Right.
Newcastle accent to do that. Whereas if I was to use a Newcastle dialect, and instead of saying I'm going home, which, you know, I'm going home, you say I'm ganning yem. So I'm ganning yem. I'm ganning, I'm going, and yem is home. So those are dialectal words. And so the way it works out is that basically the words and grammar that you choose, like, for example, if you were from Bristol, you might say, I likes, he likes, she likes, they likes, we likes, accent, right? So that's more of a Bristolian dialect. You can hear how the inflection of the word like is the same for each of those. You had the
Right.
S. Whereas if you're from the east side of England, your dialect would dictate that you'd say, I like, you like, he like, she like, it like, they like. So there's no S on the end of that.
Right.
That's
No,
part,
that's interesting.
that's part of the dialect, right? So, but dialects are not necessarily like non-standard things because in North America, you hear there's like standard Canadian dialect, standard American dialect. That's basically the way words are written on the page. And what happens is people get really kind of uppity about, oh, well, that's wrong grammar. Or, oh, well, you've done that incorrectly. You've written that incorrectly. It was, well, quite often what happens is even if the person is a so-called native speaker of English, they might have just written it in their own native dialect, a non-standard dialect, whereas like teachers expect you to write things in the standard American dialect or Canadian dialect or standard
Right.
British dialect. But everybody has their accents. Every dialect tends to have an accent associated with it, but that accent can be used to speak another dialect. Sorry, that was a very long.
No, but I think of when you're talking about it, I'm actually thinking of Newfoundland here in Canada because they have a very, very strong dialect, but they
Yeah.
also have an accent. And
Or
so
accents.
yeah,
Yeah.
so interesting. I forgot when we were starting this off, I forgot to have you introduce yourself and what you do and how long you've done it, and basically give yourself a little bit of a bio introduction. So I would really like you to do that right now.
Okay, I can do that for sure. Thanks for the opportunity. So, so yeah, I am, among other things, I'm a dialect coach. So that means that I help actors, usually help them to improve upon accents that they already have, or I teach them new accents that they can use for characters or roles that are coming up. So this could be for an upcoming audition, or it could even be when they've booked a role, and then I help them find the authentic voice for their character within which there will be an accent involved as well. So that's what I do. I've been doing that off and on since about 2003. I started doing this kind of part-time, more of a hobby thing in 2003, but it became more of an obsession and more of a full-time thing by about 2 years ago. I set up Talk Like That. So this was when I went fully online and started getting more and more clients and helping them remotely. So
Cool.
so that's pretty much my bio. And also, you might hear that from my own accent. I'm not originally from Canada, which is where I am now in Toronto, but I've been in Toronto since 2002. But originally, I'm from England. I grew up in Birmingham, which is the second biggest city in the UK. I've lived in Bristol, London, several other places where I picked up some more accents, and that kind of impacted the way I speak myself. And now, of course, I'm what you might call sort of mid transatlantic in terms of my accent. It's all over the place.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah. No problem.
So following that, it's like my next question is, why do some people have accents and others do not? And is that really true that others don't have accents?
Right. Now, I know that this is something that you don't believe, so this is more of a question that I'm sure you've heard. I've heard this before. People saying, well, I don't have an accent, but you do. But of course, the truth of the matter is that anybody who talks a language, anybody who speaks a language has an accent. You have to have some kind of accent in order for those words to come out of your mouth. Even a speech synthesizer has to have an accent. So it has to pronounce the words in some way, right? And I also have it on good authority that even people who use sign language have what they would call an accent. So that the way that you sign certain words in a particular sign language, of course, there are many, many different sign languages around the world. The way, a certain way that you would sign, that would give you what they would call an accent. But usually when we're talking about accents, we're talking about spoken languages. So everybody has an accent. If anybody says, well, I don't have an accent, but you do, they're being accent centrist. So that what that means is that they consider their accent to be the way to speak, the way things are pronounced. And everybody else who has a different accent from them has
the accent.
Yeah. And I know it sounds very, that does tend to happen mostly from people that live in small towns. I'm not being nasty towards people from small towns, but quite often some of the older people may not have traveled to other places, and if they do, it's like, well, it's far away. It's like they're different. Everything's different over there, but this is the way we are. So quite often you'll get that. However, I have seen, I think I mentioned this before, I've seen it where somebody who has worked in the film industry for a very long time has advertised for a role saying that they want the person who applies for this to have no accent, which doesn't make sense. If it said, okay, we want it to be a Canadian accent, and surely if you are somebody that's worked in the industry in Canada, you know that everybody has different accent, like the accent from all around the world here. So you need to specify. Any casting agents out there, please never ever print this. Never put no accent, because it makes no sense to most people.
And it doesn't happen all that often, to be honest. It probably happens more with inexperienced new casting, or casting assistants, for instance.
You'd think, wouldn't you? But this particular person, who will remain nameless, mainly because I can't remember that person's name, but this person said that I've been doing this for 20 years. And I thought, wow, that's a long time to be making the same mistake.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting, eh? I know a lot of people think, and it's true what you say, that basically their accent is the non-accent,
Yeah. It's considered to be the norm. This is like, and everything, it's like a kind of an absolute, is it absolutist or I don't know. It basically, they are the center of the universe.
Yes. Aren't we all?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so next question, and we've touched on this a little bit, is do actors need accents?
Right. We did touch on this a little bit. And our short answer was yes, they do. My long answer is no. You don't need accents as long as you are happy to just be portraying characters from the same place as you.
Yeah.
So if you're okay with just playing characters that come from the same, in Canada, it's a little bit more general because the Canadian accent doesn't really change much between Toronto and Vancouver.
Right.
And then when you go east from here, it does. So as long as you're okay with people being from, if you're Canadian, just doing Canadian roles with absolutely no nuance and where that person is from, then fine,
Yeah.
carry on doing that. But if
As
you're
an agent, that's really limiting in terms of what we can put you out for, because
exactly.
most of the projects right now are asking for general American accents.
Oh.
So we'll get to that. I have a question about that further on. So, so next question is basically, how long does it take to learn an accent? And this is one that I'm really curious about as well, because I have actors that want to be put out for these roles, but I'm not sure that they can actually pull this off within the time period that they have allotted. So really, how long does it take?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm going to give an answer to this that isn't short. I cannot really give you a short answer for this. Actually, I can. The short answer for this is, how long is a piece of string? That's the answer to that. Okay, but let me explain a little bit
Good
further.
answer.
Let me go into a little bit
the
more.
Long version.
Yeah, the longer version. So basically, this question is a little bit like asking, how long will it take to ride a horse to the finish line? So it makes a lot of assumptions, right? That first of all, you can ride a horse, and secondly, that you know where the finish line is, and you've got a rough estimation of the distance, right? So bear with me. I know this sounds kind of weird, but so how long it will take you to ride the horse to the finish line will depend on several things. One thing is where the finish line is in relation to you, right? So basically, in other words, how far removed is this target accent from the other accents that you already speak?
Right.
So let's say, for example, you speak in a Canadian accent. That's your own accent. And then let's say that in that case, the distance to a general American accent is going to be far shorter than it would be for someone who grew up speaking, a British accent or Australian, for example.
Right.
Or even further, it would be for someone for whom English is not their first language, right?
Right.
So there's even more of a distance. So that's one thing, right? So how different the target accent is from your own. Not to say that it's going to be really easy, because you need to learn the things that are quite different from your own, even though it's it's closer in certain terms. The second thing is basically, how much training have you had already so far? So going back to the horse analogy, did you grow up riding horses? Were you surrounded by people riding horses? Did it come as second nature to you? So for example, if you grew up with parents who spoke in those accents and you've become completely accustomed to the speech sounds and the patterns that occur in those accents, then of course it's going to be a lot easier for you because you've kind of been learning them as you've been growing up. So in my case, my mom grew up in Birmingham. She lived in Birmingham her whole life, and I was born and grew up there and left when I was 18. But my dad was from Glasgow in Scotland, so I can do a pretty good passing Glaswegian accent, and a lot of that has made it easy for me because, throughout the time I grew up with my dad, I heard those sounds that came out of his mouth, and also, people that came to visit from our family that were from Scotland every once in a while. So of course,
Nice.
that's going to help you if you already have one. I know actors that have these accents in their back pockets because they've grown up. I know one guy who's actually from I need to get somewhere in Central America. I just can't remember which country it was now, and he has a couple of Hispanic accents from different countries, especially from Central and South America, that he can just pull out because he's from that area and he knows the difference between those accents. And another guy who grew up with a Jamaican dad, so he got a job. He booked one role because he could just bring out a Jamaican accent. And they said, oh, the casting director said, oh, do you know any other accents? Because he did it in like a general American accent. He said, yeah, I can do it in Jamaican. And so he did it, and they booked him right there and then on the spot. Like, okay, you're doing it in this guy. And this was for a sci-fi role. So like he had those, right? So it is easier if you've grown up with that accent, but it doesn't preclude you from learning new ones, of course. And so, there are certain things that likely you're going to need to have pointed out to you by a professional trainer, like a dialect coach. Of course, if you're learning to ride a horse, it would be a horse trainer. And also, like, how many times have you ridden that horse, right? So the number of times you've ridden that horse is going to have an impact on how frequently you're going to fall off of it. So it's the same thing with accents. How many times have you practiced? Have you studied the accent? Have you had pointed out to you certain subtleties in the sounds that are in the phonetic system that's in there, and the rhythms, the intonations, and so on and so forth, right? So if you're experienced at learning accents, then the procedure is going to become a lot more natural to you. And the third thing is how much time and effort you invest focusing on the accent. So a student who spends an hour a week is going to take about twice as long as one who spends 2 hours a week. So that's why there's no real short answer to that, because it really depends on the person's experience so far, which means that if you have had none at all, it doesn't mean it's going to take you ages. It just means it's going to take you longer than it would had you already had some accent training before.
Right.
And it's hard to say as well, because different people will have different abilities to hear subtleties between certain sounds, and also have different will have different abilities in terms of their aptitude for producing the sound that they hear, like whether they can do that and then consistently.
Yeah. So, well, that kind of segues into another question, which is, you hear, like I've heard some people say they have an ear for accents. And I was wondering what that really means. And is it really true? Like, do some people pick up accents easier than other people?
I think it goes without saying. I think there are a lot of people who do pick up accents very quickly. And so that really, it's just like somebody who can, play the piano by ear without sheet music. It's the same kind of thing. In fact, the two are connected. You'll find that a lot of musicians that can just pick up a guitar, and I mean, I don't think anybody just like from when they're 3 years old picks up a guitar and starts playing, right? They've had some kind of, even if they haven't had any formal training, they've done a lot of observing. They've been surrounded by people who can play that instrument, and then they will take to it. So there is a connection between people who have that musical ability, because they can hear the subtleties of sound, especially if they can sing. But that definitely doesn't preclude anyone who can't sing or isn't musical from doing this. It just means that they might not be like naturally be able to jump in and mimic things as quickly as somebody who has done that for a lot of time in their life.
Okay, cool. So so then they basically, people can have an ear for it, and just a natural predisposition for it.
Absolutely, yeah. That is.
Okay, so can actors actually learn accents all by themselves, like without a coach?
Yes, they can. And I'm going to keep going back to the horse riding analogy. You can learn to ride a horse by yourself. But
do you want to? Yeah.
So here's the thing. Yes, you can. Absolutely, you can. But of course, it's like anything. If you hire a tutor or a coach of some kind, it's going to speed up that process, because that person is going to be able to point out certain things that you would not have known, right?
Exactly.
Or that will take you a lot longer to figure out,
Yeah.
right? So
Let's correct you on the mistakes that you may be making as well, right?
Yeah,
That you wouldn't be aware of.
Yes, exactly. I like the way I approach it. I don't like to call them mistakes. I prefer to call them divergencies. So,
Okay.
so somebody's like, I don't like if I'm teaching somebody an accent or helping them improve on an accent that they need to have ready to go, then I prefer to like I don't tell them, oh, that's wrong. Oh no, that sounded wrong. This is not helpful language at all. But you need to tell them that something is diverging from the target. It's divergent. It's different.
Right.
And then my job is to tell them how to adjust that and how to make it sound more accurate. So it's it is to go back to the original question, which was, can somebody learn accents on their own? Absolutely, yes. Yes, they can. But my advice would be to, at some point, get involved with, get hold of someone who can help you. Get hold of a dialect coach that knows how to show you how to improve and point out certain parts that are divergent, that need to be brought back in line to sound like you're from that place. And it takes it takes effort, of course, but yeah, it's like with anything. When you're learning something, it's good to have a teacher, but you can learn it yourself. It will just take longer, that's all.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a really interesting question. What accent should actors actually learn?
Yeah, it's a great question. Now, there's a couple of ways of answering this, and really depends on what kind of actor the person is. Like, for example, if they're an audio actor, if they're a book narrator, or they're a voice artist of some kind, the range of accents that they could learn to do is pretty much wide open. I've got to be very careful here, because when it comes to appropriateness, is that the word? Appropriacy? Oh my God, you'd never believe I taught English for a long time. But as to when it comes to if it's let's say it's a European / white person doing an Indian accent, like I call it the Apu factor. I think that does bring certain things into question about whether it's right to do that. But the reality is that for book narrators, usually they would not be asked to do something where that accent comes in a lot. But there may be a character that just comes in once in a while, and then if they can give that accent the respect that it deserves, and not lay it on too thick, then they're okay. So when it comes to what I'm trying to say is, with book narrators and so on, when you're an audio actor, then there's it's a much wider, diverse possibility for you to learn accents. So that aside, if you're an actor on screen or on stage, then of course the best thing to do is to find out what roles, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, find out what kinds of roles you're going to be cast in. Like,
exactly.
Like, does your bone structure, is your cranial structure kind of Slavic? Is it, or do people say, "Oh, are you from Ireland?" Or, so if you're, even if you're a white person, you're going to be cast for different sort of nationality roles. If you are an East Asian descended person, like I don't know, maybe you have grandparents from Japan or Korea or somewhere in East Asia, then even if you've grown up with, speaking English as your first language, even if your parents spoke English as their first language, then at least if you have that look that you could be cast in that role, then learn some accents that would allow you to become. Who's that guy who was in Kim's Convenience? Like he's a Canadian actor.
Yeah, and
He grew up. English is his first language. I mean, I think he's of Japanese heritage. His parents were Japanese, but he was cast as Oppa, a Korean man who runs that store. So, of course, he had to learn how to sound authentically like a Korean dude. And yet, and he's not Korean. I don't think he has any Korean in his family. So, so basically, yeah, find out what kind of roles that you're likely to be cast as. But also, of course, if you're based in Canada, a lot of the roles, as I'm sure you can confirm, a lot of the big roles that come up are from the States. And so you're expected to have an impeccable general American accent, just as standard, right? And the problem is the aim is to not sound Canadian, and so then you have to know what I would call the shibboleths, the pitfalls. What are the kinds of words that are going to throw you into sounding more
and
Canadian?
there's very specific ones that come up often with casting, where they will say, "No, you sound too Canadian." And so it's knowing those specific words that really will throw the self-tape out, or the audition out of the
That's
running.
right. And it's not just the pronunciations of words. It can also be vocal placement. It can also be intonation patterns as well. Like, because they tend to be fairly different as well. It's quite subtle between Canadian and general American accents, but there is a difference, and Americans can hear it, right? It will stand out. And the other thing is there's a categorization of words that are called lexical sets. If anybody's familiar with my YouTube channel, I should bring that up, shouldn't I? So on my YouTube channel, I've got a silly song up there, which is called the Lexical Set Song. And even though it's like a very lighthearted approach to it, it actually points out what the lexical sets are, and what the word types are, and examples of all the different word types in those lexical sets. So that comes into play as well, without getting too technical and too deeply into it. General American has words in different sets compared to Canadian. So I'll just give you an example. Like the day after today is, what would you say there? Okay, I mean, not the name of the day, but what would you say? There's
Tomorrow.
yesterday, today, and
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow, right? So a lot of Canadians will say tomorrow. Well, to American, that sounds really weird. They'd say tomorrow, right? Tomorrow, instead of tomorrow, because that
You're going,
right,
do what?
tomorrow, and also sorrow, and borrow, right? So they'd say sorrow and borrow. So that syllable, that sound, fits into the cloth set of words in general American accents. Well, not all American accents, but in the general American accent, it's the Whereas in Canadian, it goes into the force set of words, along with forest. And, so you got sorrow, borrow, tomorrow. It goes with force, which in American, it doesn't go into that set. So it's a different set of words. So these are just a few examples of things that any Canadian that really wants to not be, held up for their, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, come back and learn how to not sound Canadian, and then we'll think about it.
Yeah.
So these are things that they really need to have, like, basic.
This is one of the big ones for me with my guys is, like really taking on learning a really good general American accent, because it comes up so often that that's what they're looking for. That and British. And I have another question about the different British accents. And I get a question usually from my guy saying, what does the RP mean in front of British?
Oh, yeah, that's a fantastic accent. Fantastic question. About, I don't think it's a fantastic accent at all. Although I have heard a lot of people comment on it. Oh, I love the sound of it. I've even had somebody who approached me to teach him. He's a guy from Brooklyn. He said, Mark, I'd like you to teach me how to do an RP, like a British RP accent, so that I can recite Shakespeare. I'm like, really? Like, why do you want to? I was like, well, I prefer, like, the sound of it. I love the sound of it, and I'd like to be able to do that. And like, well, Shakespeare didn't talk like that at all. But, that's what you want. So yeah, to answer getting back to your question, I'm digressing again, but so what is RP was the question, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So RP stands for Received Pronunciation. And it's so called because it was the pronunciation standard that would be taught in the upper middle class and upper class educational facilities that you would usually pay to attend. And so it was an accent that was received by the people. It was something that was expected, that an educated person would talk in that manner. Now, it is it's kind of contentious in a way, because the reality is that only about 3 or 5% of the British population actually talk in that kind of accent. It is, you could say it's the equivalent of the general American or American standard accent, in that it is considered non-regional. So when you hear somebody talking in an RP accent, you can usually only tell what generation they're from, because it has changed over the years. So, for example, the accent that you'll hear Prince William talking in, that RP accent is quite different from the one that you'll hear the Queen talking in. And if you go back 50 years, you'll hear that her accent has changed quite a lot over those decades. So you can only usually pinpoint somebody with an RP accent. You can do that via, like, generation, because RP has really only been around for like maybe 150 years, 200 most. And that, it was like 200 years ago when people started saying, well, this is a correct way to talk. This is how you pronounce words. Before that, you just said things the way you would in your regional accent. So RP is just really the non-regional accent that is associated with the middle classes and upper classes to some degree. And so,
which is probably why the industry uses it, because it doesn't allow for very specific regions. Then it's British as a whole.
When you consider that the United Kingdom is a very class stratified system. I mean, not as much as it used to be. And I remember, like, I know when I was a kid, it was very unusual to hear somebody announce something on the BBC in a regional accent like that. You wouldn't hear. That would be weird. The only time you would hear regional accents would be in soaps, on TV soaps, or in comedy shows, whereas, like, a character talking in. But you would never hear somebody, and now the next program that's coming up is, the next, and
Yeah.
now the news. You wouldn't hear a northern accent announcing something, but things have changed. Like in the 1980s, things changed, and so now you still hear a lot of RP on broadcasts, but it's become less and less, and you hear more and more regional stuff come in there. The problem is, of course, that because it is a very class stratified society, there's still a lot of people around that are very accentist, which means there are people that are kind of like, oh well, you sound common, or yeah, or you sound rough, or so there is a lot of that around. But to answer your question, that's what RP is. It's a
Yeah.
non-regional middle class accent. There's no such thing as a British accent. That's homogeneous. It's just that is the middle class non-regional. It means
Okay.
you went to a very good school because your parents could afford to send you there.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good information. Okay. So there's a question that.
I just want to say hi to Oliphant Twins because
Hi,
I know they're there.
Alicia and Anisha. Hello. So should actors put accents down on their resumes?
That's
a very good comment about that. But
yeah. I would say as long as they are comfortable enough that they feel they could launch into the accent without any worries. And I know you have a story about this and you have experience of this as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, am I right?
Yeah, you don't put it down unless if you're in the room with a casting director and a director and the director says, we're thinking about doing a British accent. Could you just do this in British accent? Because it says on your resume you have it, so go for it. And then you go blah 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 blah, 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 I can't do it. So you really only put accents on your resume if you really can launch in on an immediate, that it's basically so natural for you to pick up that accent that it's a second change. If you can't do it, they're going to call you out huge on it. And, there's no getting around it. You have to absolutely be able to do it, to put it on your resume.
Yeah.
Period.
And it takes a lot of practice. It really takes so much practice, and getting it to the point where it's as natural as I don't know, like, is putting socks on natural? It's just it doesn't feel weird that I don't know, I guess, like, when you put those little booties on a dog and the dog starts to walk really weird. You've seen those videos of the dog like walking really weird? And there's this amazing one. I saw this one. It was so funny. I think it was on Instagram. Somebody put like a harness thing on a cat so they could take it for walks.
And they flop over.
The cat just sat there, and the cat just went. It just fell over.
It's so funny.
It's so funny. But I mean, the relevance of that is that it's really it's about training, and it's about getting used to that. Because if you're wearing that accent like the harness, at first it's going to feel weird and you're going to fall over, or it's going to be like those booties, and you're going to be, someone's going to have you on a YouTube clip go, look at this, listen to this guy, right? You have to get it to the point where you've trained yourself so that you can quite comfortably go down the road, walk into a cafe and order whatever's on the menu in that accent and not feel weird about it. Yeah. That's what you've got to get to, that point, right? That's if you want to be able to go into an audition with that accent, but and to then put it on your resume, because you can then say, that is mine. That accent belongs to me now. I own it. I can use it. And it's also like, you got to keep it up as well. Like every now and then check in with it. Every now and then call your friends in it. Have fun with it. And actually
spend the day just in that accent.
Yes, exactly. Spend the day in that accent. And your friends know you're weird already. So just do it, and do that with every accent before get to that point where you can check in with somebody from I don't know, it could be somebody from that place even, and just start talking to. Don't tell them you're from wherever you're from, and just get talking to them. And if they, if they say, are you making fun of me? Then, you know, maybe you're getting close to how their accent sounds and they're not sure. But and there may be the point where they ask you, where's your accent from? You sound like, I mean, if they think, oh, you sound like, you could just tell them like, well, I used to live not far from you. I lived there for a long time and I've moved away. So, my accent's changed a little bit. So there are all different ways you can do this. But the most important thing is that you get to the point where it feels natural on you.
Yeah.
You can go into it. You've had other people from that place, or a dialect coach has said, okay, you're good to go, right? And then of course, it's very different. Like if you're training for an accent for a role that's coming up, it's going to be in a short space of time.
Yeah.
And so that means that you might get it good enough just so that you can read your sides in that accent, but you don't quite own that accent yet. You can't comfortably go into that yet. But if you get it to the point where it's good enough that you can do the audition comfortably and confidently, then once you book that role, then come back to me or whoever your dialect coach is, and then
Just
set up some
do it.
hours to study,
Yeah.
and get the rest of your words down pat so that you're comfortably that character. That character feels comfortable because that is their accent. Yeah. Now, a question came up from the Oliphant twins, and they said, "Hi, times two. How do you know which accent to use? For example, a Jamaican accent. Our family is Jamaican, and we noticed that some of our friends who know how to do the accent sound a bit different." Well, the truth of it, of course, is that everybody sounds different. Nobody's accent is going to be exactly the same as another. In fact, one of you twins is going to sound different from one of the other twins. Your accents are going to be very, very similar because you grew up in the same place, in the same household, but you're going to talk differently. Even twins talk and act differently. You know how you're different. A lot of other people will have trouble telling you apart, but there are differences. And the same is in what you would call a person's idiolect, because an idiolect is the way an individual speaks. So I don't know if this is a good answer to your question, but yeah, different Jamaican people will talk in different ways. And when it comes to Jamaican, for example, you're not just talking about the accent. Again, it comes down to dialect, because in Jamaica, there are different levels of patois. It's a dialect continuum. So somebody who works in the government will talk a certain way, and maybe your auntie, when she goes to church on a Sunday, is going to talk very differently to the way a yardie will sound when you go to the bar, and they're going to use different words. It's going to be different grammar and so on. So it's a very complex thing, and all I can say is that if Jamaican accents and dialects and patois are something that you would like to bring in, absolutely, don't even give it a second thought. Bring those in, because if that is a part of your heritage, study them, and you've got them all around. If they're in your family, if Jamaicans are a part of your family, you've been hearing them the whole time, and just pay more attention to it, and just pay more attention to the intonation patterns, the words they're using, the way they ask a question. How is that different from the way other Canadians ask that question? And all of that, it's like you're already at school at home. Just take the advantage of studying.
And different, and you never know in terms of using an accent in a role. You never know when they're going to ask for that. And so, having it in your back pocket is the way to go, because roles will come up and there aren't going to be a lot of actors that have a Jamaican accent or no patois. And so having that definitely gives you an advantage over all of the other actors that are going for that role, because you've already got that, in your background.
Exactly. So, and like I said, my friend Junior, he he just pulled that out of his back pocket, Jamaica, and like in a sci-fi show, he booked the role in a sci-fi show as a Jamaican character, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's something like you wouldn't really think of, but they said, yeah, that's it, we want that. So, it doesn't even have to necessarily be something that's been asked for, but like if you
Yeah.
say, oh,
Sometimes
could I
a
try that
show will
again?
change for what you have available. Yeah.
Yeah. And if because it's like, when you go shopping, sometimes you're not sure what it is you want until you see it on the rack. It's like, oh, these are so me. I got to
Yeah.
get these. You don't know till you've seen it. So it's the same for casting directors. They have an image, they have a vision, they kind of know what they're looking for, but often it's not until it actually something shows up that is like, okay, this is a different take on what we were thinking,
That's why casting directors and producers like actors that make bold choices, because sometimes it can actually alter their own view of what they imagine the character would be, and to to the benefit of the whole production. So yeah, it's definitely good to have all of this depth, in your back pocket, as as
exactly.
Mark has
the
said.
more the more you can fit into your actor's toolbox, the
Yeah.
better, and keep honing it, keep studying it, keep at it, and sharpen. It's just like what amazes me is how there is such a deficit in North America, mainly in Canada, and to some extent in the United States, of people that don't even think about entertaining, like studying accents. They don't even consider it
Mhm.
as part of their acting toolbox, because in the UK and Australia, it's a very different attitude altogether. And there is a very, American centric attitude to this, in the way that they say, well, if somebody wants to be a successful actor, then they have to get into Hollywood. So then they have to have an American accent. No, there are so many hundreds of thousands of British actors and Australian actors that don't need Hollywood. They don't, a lot of them don't want to go to Hollywood, but they can do accents anyway because they are immersed in that, right? And of course, they have the advantage of being surrounded by different accents. Of course, if you're in Toronto in Canada, you have the privilege of being surrounded by accents from all over the world. So keep your ears
Mhm.
open. But it's a very different mindset, and so they're kind of naturalized to the whole accent thing from very early on, and it's expected that it's something to be studied in drama schools and so on. Whereas North America is really different. It's like, oh well, I'll start learning accents if I have to. It's so weird
Yeah.
to me that
Yeah, it's all about having that actor's toolbox full of all of the different types of
yeah,
skills and
being adaptable
abilities
and
that
versatile.
will allow you to actually work in more diverse roles. So,
Yeah.
okay, so here's a good one. Why are Brits and Aussies so good at doing accents?
Well, basically for the reason I just said, like they're first of all, they are um, they're in their acting schools and so on, and in drama. It's a little bit different for Aussies comparing them to the UK, because in the UK, the thing is you have so many different accents. You just have to travel like a few miles, right? You might go to the next village and the accent will be completely different from the one where you grew up. So you have like the biggest wealth of accents on that island that you will see anywhere, save for
Mhm.
example Papua New Guinea. That's a probably there's a lot more different languages there in Papua New Guinea, but on the UK on the island of Britain, you're going to hear so many different accents as you travel around just on the island. When you go on vacation just down the road an hour away, it's going to be a different accent. So we kind of grow up with that, and we see it on TV now as well. We see a lot more of that. So it's something that you expect that, okay, if you're an actor, you're going to be doing accents. That's just your
Right.
thing. That's what you do. And in Australia, it's a little bit different because there isn't such a geographical variance of accents from one side of the country to the other. Of course, in the big cities, you're going to hear accents of people that have immigrated from other countries. But the attitude there is that, it's very much like it is in Canada, unless you want to be, if you want to compete with the household names in Australia and, go for being an Australian actor in Australia on Australian television, in Australian soaps, and doing Australian work there, which is okay, absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Then you don't need to learn other accents, even though it could be very useful for you. But if you do want to move out to working in Britain or British movies, American movies, and so on and so forth, you are going to be expected to have other accents
Right.
other than your native Australian. So, it is maybe a different kind of, it's definitely a different attitude, but it comes from a different place in a way. That's my take on it anyway.
So I think we've touched on this a little bit. Are some accents harder to learn than others? And if so, why?
Yes, they are, but I can't tell you what they are because that really depends on where you're starting.
Right.
So, like you can't, it's just like with languages, when you're learning languages and, you hear these kind of questions and people will give these popular answers like, oh, what's the hardest language to learn? Oh, well, it's Polish because they have more case endings and it's, 3 genders and blah, 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 blah. Well, it's not hard to learn if you're Polish.
Right.
Or if you speak a related language, then it's easy. But again, it all depends on where you're coming from.
Right.
What is it you're used to? And it's the same with accents and dialects. Like, where are you starting and where is the finish line, right?
Right.
So the more different your target, the longer it's going to take to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So this is our last question, actually. Okay, well, actually, I've got two. So if, and this one's really from me, if you get an audition asking for an accent, is it possible to learn the accent if you only have 2 days before the audition?
Right. So, yes and no. Yes, it is possible with the right amount of effort and time. It is possible to get you to a place where you can convince the casting director that you can do the accent character, right? Again, it really does depend on your starting point. It really does depend on how much you've worked with a director, how much you've worked with a dialect coach before. Like if you have one that you can call like the evening before and say, "Oh my God, I need this. Do you have 2 hours?" If you're in the same time zone as them, or you're in a time zone that is to the east of them, that's good. Good news. If you are in a time zone that is to the west of them, not so good. So if you're in LA and you have a dialect coach in, say, New York or whatever, then you might have a problem there because your dialect coach might be going to bed before you need to work on the accent, right, the next day. Depending on what time your dialect coach goes to bed, does she keep her phone on, right, overnight? I certainly don't. So, but yeah, it really does depend, like I say, on how much work you've done before, how well your dialect coach knows you already, and knows what you can do, and how comfortable you feel with them in order for them to get you to where you need to be audition ready. So the answer is yes. A good dialect coach should be able to hopefully get you audition ready. But you will need, if you were to book that role, then you will need other work afterwards to
absolutely
set ready.
Yeah.
That's different.
So the
Yeah.
moral of this story is basically be prepared and start learning these now. And as an agent, be very careful what kind of audition you're giving to your actor if they haven't come from a place where they're, already training for accents that may be required. So just from my own going forward in terms of submitting my guys, I will, make sure that my guys have already prepared before I submit them for an audition. And so I really see lots of projects asking for a general American accent. And I've often wondered, and really knowing that there are so many different, possible dialects and accents out there, what does a general American accent mean? Because we definitely know, oh, well, we want a Southern accent. Well, we know what that kind of sounds like, but what is a general American accent?
Okay, so a general American accent is one in which you won't hear any regional features. So it will be very difficult to find out where somebody actually is from, where they originate from, just from their accent. And so, in the same way that an RP accent is non-regional, and you cannot tell which part of the United Kingdom somebody is from just by their accent, the same way a general American accent is going to do the same thing. Like nothing is going to jump out at you and say, "Hey, I'm from New York," or
Right.
Ohio, or Atlanta. So it's so general that it has been expunged of any regional features. And so all you can say is that it is American, but you can't say which part of the United States this is
So
from.
is general American accent only used for the industry then? Is it very specific to our industry then?
It's not specific to the acting industry. It has a very similar story to RP. In that it is used in the broadcasting industry. So it is something that would be used on national television, originally national radio, so that you can't hear like somebody's, like, it's not a local station.
Right.
It's the voice of authority, right?
Right.
So it is something that, okay, everybody, now listen to me. This is the voice you can trust. I'm going to give you some information that you can believe, even if it's
Right.
not true.
Right.
So it's a very general
Interesting.
kind of, it's that's why it's general American, really, or also called standard American English, which also relates to the dialect. So
Right.
it is, so that's what it is. And I think it's used because quite often the backstory of certain characters are not developed to the point where it's like, oh, well, he has to be from there. It's
Right.
different from like the mayor of what is it, with Kate Winslet, the character that she plays in Mayor of I can't remember the name of this show, but
Oh, we're
because
so embarrassed.
the character is, that's the thing, maybe it's an age thing, I don't know, but maybe one of our viewers can remind me what it is. But the role that she plays in that is so specifically from I believe it's Western Pennsylvania. It's definitely, it's a specific region that this accent is from. And Kate has her own dialect coach, right? She knows where it's at. She knows what it takes to, go for an Oscar. Not
Yeah.
that everyone's going for Oscars, but she has her dialect coach that she works with every time. And she was really specific. She wanted the accent from that area. She wanted that to sound
Right.
like she was from there. And that's what her coach worked on with her. They got samples from the place of people from there. And she worked really hard, even to the point where I think she ended up throwing she threw something at the wall. I don't know what it was, but the story is that like she was so frustrated with learning this accent. It was like none other that she'd ever heard before or worked
Yeah.
on. But she meant business, right? She was like, that's what she was going for. She was focused. And so there you go. So that was definitely an example of a non-general American accent because it
Right.
was specific to a region in the US. Yeah.
I think of the one person that I always thought was like amazing was Hugh Laurie in his role on House, because I watched that show like a zillion times and really imagined that he was American until I heard him speak on a talk show one day, and
Well,
lo and
you're
behold, he
not
was
alone.
British.
Yeah, you're not
I
alone
was shocked.
because I remember I remember reading posts on Hugh Laurie from Americans, and it had me in stitches. It was the funniest thing. And they were saying things like, "Oh my God, I saw this. I saw the actor Hugh Laurie, and he was speaking in like a limey accent. I don't know why he sounded like that." And so, of course, I was laughing because I've grown up with Hugh Laurie
Yeah.
as a comedy actor. You know, he's been in like he was in was it Oxford's Footlights. He was in that. He used to work alongside Stephen Fry. He's been in so many, like he was in his own comedy things along with, he was in a bit of Fry and Laurie. He worked with not Tony Curtis, a completely different person, but he worked with Ben Elton and whatever his name, Curtis, in making Blackadder. So he's in several seasons of
Yeah, who
Blackadder,
knew?
right? And like,
Yeah.
you know, Rowan Atkinson, who was Mr. Bean, he was cast as Blackadder. So he was in that. And so I always grew up with Hugh Laurie as being a comedy actor and seeing him in comedy things and playing a bumbling buffoon with a very RP accent. Oh, yeah, like this kind of like a very foolish character.
Crazy.
And then suddenly, like my shock was when I saw him in House and he's playing this grumpy American doctor. I'm like,
I know.
what?
I
And
know. I
the
know.
whole story started with like that debut into like the American scene. Okay, he had done Stuart Little, so he played the American father of Little Mouse, Stuart.
Yeah.
So he had played Hollywood before, but it was like not a huge kind of role. And then what happened was he was shooting on something in Africa, in a country in Africa somewhere. I can't remember what country it was. It might have been South Africa. And then he saw the casting call go out for House. And he's like, I want it. But he was staying in a hotel. So the only place that he could go that was quiet enough for him to do his self-tape was the toilet of this hotel room. So he did his self tape in the washroom in this hotel in Africa, and did it, and then sent the self tape in to the director in the United States. And when the director watched it, he said, "Yeah, this is the kind of American actor we need for this show." The director didn't even know he was.
Yeah, I know.
He
You
never
know
heard
what?
of Hugh Laurie. He didn't know who he was.
It's unbelievable.
Like, oh, he's that person.
I know. I'm still, when I think about it, and honestly, I did not have a clue who he was prior to that show.
Yeah.
And then saw him on a talk show and just like
Yeah, and it just goes to show like how serious most British actors take it.
Yeah.
Like they know it is, you need to have your accent down. Like you have to take it seriously to the point where you take it so far that it's like, I got this, I own this, I am this. This is my character.
Yeah.
And then get it to the point where the accent fades into the background and it's not a feature. You know, it's like, it's just a part of that.
It's just a part of you. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is why, unashamed plug coming up. This is why I have got together, I'm collaborating with Kat Shaw to create A Cubed, which is the actors Accent Actors Academy. It will be a 6-week program. And if anybody is interested in this, and I can't think why you wouldn't be, then you should sign up for the A Cubed newsletter by going to talklikeThat.com/A3. And
Good
then,
plug, good plug.
yeah, and then as soon as those application forms are open, I will send you an email to let you know so that you can apply. Because there is going to be a maximum number of students that we can permit into one semester, because we're going to be for 6 weeks, we're going to be sort of tag teaming, where Kat is going to be teaching all the centering, getting in touch with the character, really getting good at that, and also embedding the accents that I will be assigning to you. Each person is going to be assigned an accent, and you're going to be working with that accent for 3 weeks at a time. We're going to be, each person is going to be assigned an Anglo accent, as I call it, which means an accent of somebody who speaks English as a first language, or as their native language, and also for 3 weeks, you'll be assigned an accent that is non-Anglo, so from a country where the first language is something else. And that, so yeah.
Love it. Love it.
Okay.
So that's all the questions I have for you at this time, I have to say. And I encourage everybody, like, put your, I encourage everybody to, check Mark out and get on this accent thing, because it's like, check him out, because it's really important. As an agent, it's hugely important to get that toolbox like well fitted with everything that you need to do the job. Accents is one of those huge items to put in your toolbox.
Awesome.
So with that, I'm just going to do a little side here. I was sitting here in this thing, and while I was sitting here, I see the name of a big casting director come up on my phone. And if I'm sitting here kind of going, it's because I just got a phone call that I couldn't answer from a really big casting director. So on that note, thank you, Mark, for this. I really appreciate all the work you're doing with our actors. And so
thank you for the opportunity. And thank you for asking the question. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry. See, I'm still stunned a little bit.
Yeah. Wow. I need to hear more about this.
Yeah, but let you know as soon as we end our session.
Better get going so you can get back to them. Yeah. Make that call. All right.
Sorry about that.
The life of a high-flying talent agent.
Thank you for this, Mark. We'll talk next week.
Awesome. And if anybody has any suggestions for stuff that we can talk about next week, then the floor is open. You can contact Teri. You can contact me either on Facebook or through Instagram, or right here. If you're logged into YouTube, you can add them in the comments, and we can get back to you. Okay. Yeah. So thanks everybody for watching.
Okay. Have a good week, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, Teri.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Okay. Bye.